All right, I think this week, Isaac, you're supposed to be sharing, correct?
Yes.
So will you please open us back up in prayer?
Of course. Lord, we seek you in this time. Lord, and we want to learn more of you, and we want to know you better. Lord, so let us have that heart in this time. Let us get to know one another more as well. Lord, I bless Justin and his relationship before you, and his relationship with us as well. Lord, continue to develop those things and continue to work on our hearts. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right, before I forget, who has not shared yet their interaction? Emma? And then Elijah, are you wanting to share?
Yeah, I could still do that.
Okay. So let's go ahead. Do you want to pick someone for next week now?
Yeah, let's do Emma.
Emma. Okay. So Emma this week, and then Elijah, you'll be after Emma. And then I did want to say for any of our adults who are out there, if you guys did select them and want to share, I want to make time for that as well. Okay, before we jump in, this week's homework assignment for me will be regarding your poems. I just want an update on where you're at. So if you have started, an update would look like just sending me the link or whatever. Or this is how far I'm through. If you haven't started, don't panic. That's an easy answer to say, I haven't started yet. And that's okay. But what I will say is that now is kind of the time between the poems and the essays as well for us to start thinking in terms of those. I would say if I was going to prioritize one, I'm going to ask you to prioritize the poem first, because as we wrap up some of our interactions with Christ, and everyone gets a chance to share, I would like to start going through our poems maybe each week and building a little bit more time in the margins for some conversation around that as well. And then if it's all right with you, Noah, I'll have them also attach you to to them sending it in to me for the sake of poetry and for another set of eyes to observe that as well, unless there's objections.
No, I'm not.
So you want us to send the poem to Noah as well?
Yeah. So if you've started it or if you finished, and then wherever you're at too, if I can just have a general idea, haven't started, 50%. I'm pretty convinced this is the finished work. I mean, obviously we might not be full drafts yet. So just out of curiosity, is there anyone who's like locked and loaded, you got it down, you're feeling really confident? Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm asking that because you're going on the tail end of your experience with Christ. You might be the initial person to lead us into that conversation around that. So, okay. How are we feeling about our reading pace? Is everyone caught up? We're feeling good about it? Okay. Has anyone this week decided to move on into the next book?
A little bit.
Okay. Good. Wonderful. In keeping with last week, I just wanted to make note of one individual, and I think I'm gonna strive to highlight somebody each week, not for the sake of just highlighting. And so I'm not just going to come up with something just for the sake of coming up with it, but I want to be very intentional about honoring you guys as well for the commitments that are here, because I will say, generally speaking, across the board, the hearts in which you guys come to this is a real delight to see. And so looking back all those years ago when I was your age, I don't think I had that same even perspective or desire in life. And so to observe it from you guys collectively is such an honor to sit in front of you and to be able to have a place, an appointment in your life. It really is such an honor to me to get to participate with you guys in this way, and to see you guys consistently show up through the things that you say, things that you observe, the encouragements that you make to one another. It is really exemplary. It is not a common thing. And I want to mark that out. You really are a set apart people. And this really is a set apart time. And the work that you guys are doing here really is a set apart time. And I can only imagine that our Father also takes such delight in the ways that we're all working together in this way. So, but I do want to highlight Hattie this week. Hattie reached out to me because she was stuck a little bit in the reading. And Hattie, I wanted to say how much that really honored me. I really appreciated that you came to a place where you're like, hey, this is where I'm at, and I'm going to be honest with it. But then to also just see your heart being really willing to engage in it, because it would have been so easy to just let the book wash over you and not give it too much mind and just plug away at it and just read it through and just kind of put it into the category of one of 1,000 things that we do. But I think I know that your heart in that, to really set aside the time to prioritize it, to me, just is a really honoring thing. And demonstrates again, I think for all of us, that we don't have to have the material grasped fully. That sometimes the best communication is just, hey, this is where I'm at. I'm stuck. I don't really like the book. I'm having a hard time with the book, or I do like the book, but I'm having a hard time with the book. It's really just helpful to have a perspective of walking through it together. So let that be an invitation for all of us to just kind of be where we're at, as long as we're communicating about it. And so thank you for reaching out. I enjoyed our chat together. Okay, so we are, I know maybe you can't see this, in book 4, and this week we're going to attempt to address chapters 5, 6, and 7 in one of my books anyways. The chapter here, chapter 5, is the Grove of Daphne. And so if you have your books with you, let's open up to that particular chapter. And then let me ask you this again. Ben-Hur. Wallace does this a lot, where he has patterned his book to have some of the main characters being the settings or the places. So how many of you, or did any of you take the time to search out what the Grove of Daphne actually is? Okay, I might just invite you, and this is, again, not an expectation, but a loving and gentle nudge, particularly with books like this, when we see settings that are really prominent in authors' writings. It would be really good for us to at least try to get an understanding of where that is and what that is. Sometimes when we read fiction, it's a made-up place, and so we don't have access to it. And so I will say, in this context, what we wanted to consider Ben-Hur of being is what we would call historical fiction. And so what that means is he's actually using historical events, historical people, and historical places in which he puts the context of the story in. And so when we do come across a place like the Grove of Daphne, it's actually really important to the storyline for us to have at least a measure of familiarity with what that place is. Because that place has a temperament and it has a personality of its own, particularly in the context of this culture wars that we're going through, right? This idea of Rome and then the Hebrew mindset. And so not having that, you guys could read the book and probably figure things out itself. But having some of, again, those layers to things will help enhance the story a lot more. Because one of the things that Lew Wallace is really good at using as a literary device for us is, a couple of things. First is symbolism. What is symbolism?
It's like using metaphors or pictures.
Yeah.
To describe something.
Yeah, when you said the next word that he uses. So symbolisms and metaphors, right? He's using places, pictures, things that are trying to communicate something that's further and beyond the story. And so when we understand these things, it actually will help us navigate how the story goes. And so with a book like this, and I would say Ben-Hur could be considered, we could consider it maybe a dense book in the sense that there's a lot of like informational things that are going on, and we can get bogged down in the weeds with that stuff really quick. It's not right now, at least, as it's not fast paced, like a lot of action and things going on. And so you're seeing a lot of like, man, he's explaining a lot of the surroundings. So when we have this, we have to ask ourselves, what does this symbolize? What is it a metaphor for? And then the last thing that it's going to do is foreshadow. What is that? Foreshadowing.
Isn't it like setting up something for something that's going to happen later?
Yeah. It's going to tell the story without telling the story. It's going to allude to the greater story. So again, good authors will write this in ways that leave you breadcrumbs so that after you've read the book, or if you're into cinema or movies or whatever, and you watch a movie that's a little bit harder to comprehend, like Inception, or what's the other, Interstellar. How many of you have seen Interstellar? The first time you watch it, it's not like you're like, oh, totally figured everything out. You might get a sense of it, but the second time, how many of you watched it twice? You went back. The second time you were like, you felt like you got a lot more out of it. And you made connections, like the first part of the movie, you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. It actually told the whole story right there. Well, this is what a good author will do, is he's foreshadowing to you what's going to take place. And the reason why that's a good literary device and why it actually pushes the story forward far better, it is that you intuitively are kind of in the flow or the direction that the author wants to take you. Because he's super intentional, like any good author is, super intentional about getting you down the mountain, so to speak. How am I going to get you to the place that I want you to set up camp in? And so what separates really good literature, real particular fiction, from really bad fiction or bad literature is the author's ability to transport us from one place to the next. Well, again, here we have Lew Wallace, who's going to give us these historical places, right? We've got to remember that he was a man who didn't know the story as well as he thought he did. And so he spent a lot of time researching these things. And so why he will highlight them is they meant something to him. And this is actually a place that he is going to use to continue to play off this idea of multiple different cultures. And so with that being said, the Grove of Daphne is a physical place that's outside of Antioch, near the Orontes River. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just with the Grove of Daphne. I did not look it up. But
Uh-huh.
I had prior knowledge of Daphne, and when you put me on the spot, I was
Oh,
nervous, like, oh,
okay.
am I wrong? But yeah, I'm fairly certain she was like a nymph of some sort.
Yep.
And then was it Cupid or Apollo that shot her?
No, they didn't shoot her. So we're going to talk about. Yeah, we're going to talk about. She's connected to Apollo, but this word comes to where she becomes she's created into a laurel tree.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a place primarily of Greek or Roman worship that deals with Apollo and Artemis.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone know the relationship of Apollo and Artemis?
Siblings.
Siblings, but more specifically, they are
Oh, the gods of? Is that what you're
no, not gods of. They're siblings. That's true. But what kind of siblings?
Twins?
Twins. Yeah. And so when we see that, particularly in mythology and things like that, the connection of twins, right, it's they're one part of a whole. And so we can never think of these two in terms of being separate and apart from one another. And so there's a dynamic that's at work. And so the Grove of Daphne is a place where primarily these two god figures will be worshipped. And so when we understand Greek mythology and Roman mythology, and really those two are kind of stuck together because the Greeks will basically have one name and then the Romans will have co-opted that name and called it something else. And so we get like the main Greek guy is Zeus. And then we see in Roman mythology, what is Zeus called? Does anyone know? Jupiter, yeah. And so we see then kind of this interplay between both of them. And so they're represented here. And so this is a place that people go to for wonder and sublime. And there's this temple worship and all of this stuff. And so they're paying their tributes here to Apollo and Artemis. And so Apollo is the god of, does anyone know?
Vaguely the things. I know it's the sun, but not really, because that's Helios and
Mhm.
singing and music and such, but I don't know exactly what that
Okay,
would be.
You're onto it. There's actually a place, it's in New York, I think, and they they actually have this thing called the Night at the Apollo. And it's really built around primarily this, the god of music. And he is also the god of the arts. And then also prophecy and healing. Now I said, oops, that looks like a no, but it meant to be a G. So he is male, but Artemis is female. So what kind of twins are those called? Would it be fraternal when they're either they don't look alike or they're opposite? Yeah. And so what is Artemis the goddess of? Hunt. Yeah, the hunt. And the wilderness.
Don't they both have night and day parallels as well?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then wild animals. And then childbirth. But let's again look at the two sides here, right? Very much something that is geared towards a specific, like, gathering in of the arts, and then something that is more wild in nature. And so we see in Apollo kind of a more refined person or perspective, and Artemis there's kind of this concept of the wild. And so what this also represents, night and day, the inner parts of a person and the external parts of a person, right? The arts and music, prophecy, healing, that's all about within the person. The hunt and the wilderness, all of those things are external. And even childbirth is considered external because it's the bearing of something to put something out into the world. And so why is it important that we understand this? Because what is taking place currently in the narrative is that Ben-Hur has... he's just went to try to find out the story of his mother and his sister, and he doesn't get the answers that he wants. Now, let's put ourselves again in this position that he found himself in. He goes to Simonides, right, and he's looking for answers, and he is so hopeful for the first time in so many years, so hopeful that he's going to get an answer to the story, and nothing. So how would you feel in that moment when you have every expectation, anticipation, and every hope to get these answers, and then for it to be returned with no word and nothing? Like, how would you respond to that? Well, maybe some of us would say, well, that's no big deal.
Be a little bit angry.
A little angry. Now, let's lean into that. But angry at whom? Just in general anger? A specific anger? What kind of anger does Benji in this moment experience? What kind of anger do you?
In general, probably.
Just in general. And so it's just so it's just general feeling of like anger, right? And I don't know if you've ever had a general feeling of anger. How does that impact your everyday living or your dynamics with other people? What do you do when you find yourself generally angry? Benji, how do you manage that?
Try to think about it a little bit.
Okay.
See what's angering me.
Yeah. So we might be a little bit introspective. Does Judah Ben-Hur seem like that kind of guy? Like he's just like he's going to a quiet place to himself and he's just going to take it into himself? Or is he not really internalizing it in that way? Well, what does the narrative say? He gets swept up he goes into this place, right? The Grove of Daphne. And this actually, what the Grove represents for us is we need to think in terms of temptation. Mm-hmm. He is putting himself very much in a place to be tempted. Well, let's consider this again. When the disappointments of life are met with an emotion, and so anger is one. What could be another emotion that we might experience when things didn't go our way? Bitterness?
Depression.
Yeah. Depression? Yeah, so I mean, we all have ways, right, of how we navigate the disappointments of life, right? To be disillusioned, to be depressed, to be angry, to be bitter, or here's one that's really like nefarious, right? To be apathetic, which is what? Is to feel like I have no feeling, which that actually there's a lot behind that, right? And when we talk about anger in particular, anger is what we call, like many things, anger is what we call a secondary emotion. What does that mean? It's why how you handle your anger is really healthy, by the way. Anger is called a secondary emotion because nobody gets angry for no reason. There's always a primary emotion that leads to anger. Anger is amoral, and Jesus will talk about this a lot. And the concept of biblical anger, right, is that do not let the sun go down on your anger. To be angry, but to not sin. And so anger can actually be a really like healthy emotion. It has no morality to it unless we have pushed it underneath or allowed it to rise up because there's something that's unhealthy underneath it. Right? Jesus demonstrates his anger by doing what? At the temple. Like he's really zealous. He's really angry for what? His father's house to be represented really well. And he flips over the money changer's table. He ties a... Am I missing the
No,
present?
I did exactly that right as you.
Okay, perfect. See there. See? Yes, it all plays out perfectly. Right. And so we would say when we read that narrative, right, that we wouldn't go, man, Jesus, you need to cool it. Calm down. That was so inappropriate. Right. Well, we know that Jesus was without sin. And so it actually, the righteous indignation or anger that he demonstrates there is appropriate. But it's appropriate because he has full control of his mind, his will, his emotions. All of those things are in alignment with the Father, right? And so when he acts in this way, that is exactly what is necessary for the moment. But when we consider things like anger for you and I, how often have we found ourselves in perfect unity with the Father so that our anger was justified? Maybe not a lot. Maybe if we have, maybe that's kind of a really unique thing. And so as he is walking from this disillusionment into this place, what the author wants us to know is there's a trap that's being set here for him. Now, this is particularly interesting to note in the context of the story because if we'll remember where we left off, right, Simonides sent his servant Malach, right, to do what? To observe and to report back everything that Judah is going to go through. And so, man, we have like this perfect environment for things to go sideways really, really quickly, right? So how do we meet? I want this to be something that you might even consider, and if you journal, I would say journal around this. But how do you deal with disappointment or disillusionment? Where do you go? Now this can be a physical place. Where do I go? Do I give thought to what I'm doing, where I'm going, who I'm engaging with? Because the danger of disillusionment, right, is that it kind of brings you to this place where you're not super aware of. In fact, Judah will talk about this throughout some of these chapters here where he found himself in this place that he wouldn't normally have gone to. And he makes this observation, but by the time we make those observations a little further down the line, right, we've already stepped into some really dangerous ground here. And so we want to be very, very, again, mindful of, as we observe in the story, again, what the author is wanting us to picture, he wants to paint us into. And again, we would be really well informed to consider how we might also respond in this way. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to be divorced, too far separated from the antagonist and the story that's going on there. In fact, one of the ways that we can be hindered in reading is to not have a connection with the story at all. And again, if you don't have a story with a connection with the story, some of that may be just that person doesn't have anything in them that you can relate to in this moment of time. But sometimes the answer is, I'm not leaning into or looking at myself here. I'm not allowing this character in the book to be a reflection that is meant to help me navigate what I think and feel in those moments. Because we could all certainly, whether we've experienced it or not, we could all certainly think, man, what it would be like to have a sibling or siblings and my parent or parents taken away from me and to not know where they are at, but being longing for it. Like, imagine what that is like and what I would expect. Because again, that is exactly what the author wants us to do. All right, and so we find ourselves in the Grove of Daphne. Daphne was actually the first love of Apollo, but she never responded back to his love. And so this is again important to note in the context of the greater story that we're going to see. This is a little bit of light foreshadowing, right? And so there is kind of, again, this feeling of unmet expectations. And what is he dealing with? In the Grove of Daphne, the person who doesn't return Apollo's affections. Apollo is the place that, one of the people that is worshipped. And what Apollo is experiencing here is the unmet expectation of love not returned. And so we see again all of this interplay, right, that's going on here between the characters and the setting. And so what do we need to make sure that we are reading through the lens of? Disappointment and disillusionment for Judah. All right, let's look at, should be in the first page here of this chapter. Yeah, let's go to the first words here. When Ben-Hur sallied from the great warehouse, it was with the thought that another failure was to be added to the many he already met in the quest for his people, and the idea was depressing exactly in proportion as the objects of his quests were dear to him. Now, how deep is this depressing nature of this disappointment? Well, if we can visualize in our mind, how much do you love your family? How much? Now think about the intensity of that affection and love, and then to be close to them, the presence of them also. And so it's not just the thought about them, but it's actually the way that you feel when you're around them. Now, compare that to them being completely gone in the opposite direction of the same intensity of the love is met with the same intensity of this weight of being depressed, pushed down upon, rejected, not having, right? That same level of intensity is what he is experiencing. Again, this is giving us context into how desperate is Judah for something to go right here. How desperate is he for some kind of resolution, right? He's almost wound so tight that, man, things could go all different sorts of directions, right? Like if there's not some resolve for him soon, like this could be really dangerous for him. Now, you guys have already read the story, but in light of that, let's consider then some choices that he's about ready to make. Is this something that is driving forward more of a desire for vengeance? Or is this something that is releasing the weight of that vengeance?
I just wanted to say, I just noticed it for the first time,
Sure.
actually. That line sounded familiar to me. And the idea was depressing exactly in proportion as the objects of his quest were dear to him.
Mm-hmm.
That is the exact opening of book 3.
Book 3. Yep.
Our size of sorrow must be
Size of sorrow,
proportion
yeah.
to our cause, and as
So-
great as that which makes
Yeah,
it.
and so he's playing back, right? Again, these narratives, and that in chapter 3, what was the excerpt from which one?
Oh, that was from Enter Below Diomedes? Or,
Right, so that's Anthony and Cleopatra.
yes.
Right, and so yeah, playing again on this understanding of how literature builds upon itself. Right, but there's an intensity there, right? There's a disappointment that's there, and it needs some resolve. And so, if you are in his shoes, do you think in this time where he's kind of being drawn into this place of beauty and wonder, and it's built around the whole Roman culture and the Roman ideal of things, do you think he is more susceptible to move more into vengeance? Or is this more likely to be something that brings release for him? Like anything, right? It is our responses in those moments that are super critical. And this is kind of, I think, again, intentional on the part of the author. Because one of the things that we see, not in the narrative, but in the backdrop historically of what Lew Wallace is writing about, is this great war of what is supposed to be a civilized union of people together. And yet there's been this major fracture, and now there's this need to reunify. But there's this kind of, again, this dual nature to things that he wants us to be really mindful of, the dual nature within the heart and mind of man. In fact, I wouldn't encourage you to read this, but there's a popular book called The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that really plays at these ideas that within us there's this good nature and there's this bad nature. Well, actually that's really kind of borrowed from biblical nature, right? Within us there is an old nature. Romans talks about this a lot, that's trying to resurrect itself for those who are sons of God or believers. There's this old way of thinking that it almost just doesn't want to stay dead. It wants to rise back up in us. But there's this new nature, right? That is alive and needs to be considered again and again and again and looked at and focused on. And so when we walk into places like this of disappointment, then the second question is not just how do we deal with that, or how do we look at that, or how do we overcome that, but where are we fixing our gaze on it? Because when you are disappointed or in disillusionment, if your focus is on the disappointment and disillusionment, is that something that helps take you out of it, or is that actually something that can keep you rooted in it? Right? We think in terms of this, like we talk about the difference between sin consciousness and sun consciousness. What's the difference there? Perspective. Right? Does having sun consciousness mean that we haven't sinned? No, it just means that our what we're identifying with, we're placing our identity in, is that we are sons and not sinners. It's true that we are sons that sin, but when we put a lot of emphasis or focus, right, like what we put before our eyes, if sin is the primary thing that we're looking at, what is the likelihood that we're going to continue in that pattern or way of thinking? Right? This is the habitual patterns that we're faced with. But if we look at sonship and we look at, as the Bible says, to fix our eyes on Jesus, who is the author and the finisher of our faith, as we have that perspective, a higher perspective, what is that meant to do? To draw us out of the conditions of that sinful nature, that old nature, and to pull us to a greater nature. So again, man, we've only gotten not even a paragraph in. And this is where, again, I might just invite you into a little bit of subtle research in the settings, because this is exactly what Lew Wallace wants to set us up for. It curtained him round about with a sense of utter loneliness on earth. Okay, so now it's not just enough to feel depressed, right? The weight. But now I feel like have this full weight on me and there's not another person around. And of course, when it talks about this, there's many other people that are around, right? But you can be in a room of 1,000 people and feel utterly alone. And that's the point that he's getting at here, right? That you're completely severed. And so it's not just one thing to feel depressed, but now you feel as if there's no context for relationship. This is a pretty hopeless place that he finds himself in, which more than anything else serves to eke from a soul cast down its remaining interest in life. Man, this is just like not hopeful at all. But let's look at the dual nature again of the Grove of Daphne. The Grove of Daphne is supposed to represent a place of hope in this beautiful lush garden and teeming with life and fun and fellowship and not in the ways that we would consider fellowship, but this is the Roman idea, right, of this like height of ecstasy and pleasure and joy, and he finds himself depressed and downcast and removed from others. So what is, let's identify this then. Then what is the temptation here for Judah? Exactly.
The losing hope.
Losing hope. That's a pretty good temptation. What about what he might not what he will lose, but what he might find? What might he find in a garden of pleasure? Well, all the pleasures of the world. Escape. Yeah. To just be done with it, right? See again, the author wants us to get to this place where we're struggling still to have to decide the right way and the wrong way. Because we have to know that there is a right way to think and a wrong way to think. Right? Again, that's playing on the dual nature of man. Will we make beneficial, good decisions, or will we fall into bad patterns again in our life? In fact, then he talks about this as the story goes. Do you remember how he's walking on these different pathways, and then he observes like different colors of stone, right? And one way was for the footmen, and one were for the horses, and one were for the chariots. And so there were some roads for those who are outgoers, and there were roads for people who are coming in, right? Like when we think about hopefully when you drive, for those of you who have your license, right? You stay on one side of the road. You don't venture into the other side of the road and continue it on the pattern, right? We generally want to follow the laws of the road, right? All right, quick quiz for you drivers. What side of the road are we supposed to drive on? Generally speaking, right or the left?
Wow, pick one really.
Whichever one feels good in the moment. Well, what happens? I mean, seems like a silly analogy. It's important. What happens if we are on the wrong path?
Head-on collision.
Yeah. It leads to what? Destruction. Death. Absolutely. And again, this is what the author is, I mean, they didn't have modern highways when he wrote it. But again, this thought that he's offering us is, right, there's a way or a path that one has to take. And what he's observing here is there are many paths. There are many roads. There are many outgoings and comings in. But there's one kind of mindset within Rome. It was said of Rome about roads.
All roads lead to.
Yep. All roads, what?
Lead to Rome.
What does that mean?
In the literal sense, it's because the Romans made a lot of our road structures, but
Yeah.
I think ideologically that all mindsets, you'll eventually realize logically that all mindsets lead to the Roman mindset because they're superior.
Yes. That's exactly what it's trying to draw us into. Is that all roads, all ways, that Rome is so powerful that really, right, that
Eventually.
every way that you go should inevitably lead you to this. Rome
Height of thought.
is the culmination. It is the apex above all things. Well, again, what he's subtly doing with these highways and byways and paths is he's telling us something about what goes on in the human mind. Right? Because we have a way that seems right within our own mindset. But what does the Bible say? The way that seems right in a man often leads to death. And so there's the paths that we ought to take because we're led by the Spirit, right? And there's paths that we take because we are kind of floating through life. Well, which path is Judah on? He's not walking with a lot of intention or forethought. He's because he's feeling hopeless, he's aimless. Right? He's lost a little bit of perspective here. Again, this is exactly where the author wants us to wrestle with in our own hearts and minds. What do we do when we are disillusioned? What do we do when we're feeling a sense of hopelessness? What do we do when we're overwhelmed? Where do we find ourselves? And again, I'll ask this question, where do you go? Where do you go? Where do you go in your mind? Where do you go in your heart? Where do you go in your physical person? What is the pattern of your life? What is the road that you take? Is your road in coming into something? Is your road a road of escape from something? Where is the path that you take? A couple pages in here, it gets to the point where it's talking about the grove, and it says the hymns swelled to louder strains, the music quickened time, and borne along with the impulsive current and sharing the common eagerness, he passed in and, Romanized in taste as he was, fell to worshiping the place. And so he is drawn in, right? He is seduced into this worship of creation. He's being sucked into this temptation. Again, really dangerous place to be. A little later on, it talks about, it goes through this like poetic saying here that was graven in Greek. It says, "O traveler, art thou a stranger? Hearken to the singing of the brooks, and fear not the rain of the fountains. So will the Naiades learn to love thee. The invited breezes of Daphne are Zephyrus and Auster. Gentle ministers of life, they will gather sweets for thee. Where Eurus blows, Diana is elsewhere hunting. Where Boreas blusters, go hide, for Apollo is angry. The shades of the grove are thine in the day." So the shades, right? It's the comfort from the sun shining bright from the heat of the day. "At night they belong to Pan and his dryads. Disturb them not. Eat of the lotus by the brookside sparingly, unless thou wouldest have surcease of memory, which is to become a child of Daphne." And so what it's saying is, it really is inviting you in to forget all of the cares of the world and to just rest. Well, again, this is appealing to what kind of mind? A mind that is disillusioned and disappointed and depressed and alone. Right? When we think about one of the first things that God says in Genesis, after the creation of man, Adam in particular, he says this: it's not good for man to what? Be alone. Why does God say that? Because man was created primarily for what? Relationship. And so again, we see that this concept of aloneness is really a haunting thing. To find ourselves alone is a dangerous place for us to be. "Walk round the weaving spider, 'tis Arachne at work for Minerva. Wouldst thou behold the tears of Daphne, break but a bud from a laurel bow and die? Heed thou and stay and be happy." And so the laurel is the tree that Daphne is turned into. The laurel is a tree that they use for the crown of life. And what this invitation is kind of like, either stay here and enjoy pleasures forevermore, or stay here and die. Well, that, again, to us sitting in this room, that actually sounds like a terrible mindset. But again, we see that Judah has been Romanized enough to have some sensibilities here, right? And so while the adoption was a real benefit to him in one sense, it actually brought him into this Roman way of thinking, which will be a great hindrance to him. And he hasn't fully come to grips with this. In fact, later on it will say this: "No one was ever lost in Daphne, except those on whom her gates close forever." What do you think that means?
Could you read it one more time?
No one was ever lost in Daphne, except those on whom her gates close forever.
Maybe those who didn't escape that way, that place for all.
Okay. Good. Is Judah lost? Yeah, he's lost in the sense that he doesn't know which way is up, right? He's disoriented. And what this place is, meant to be, right? No one is ever lost in Daphne. What this is actually saying is you're found, to be found in this place, right? To have all of the answers to life given to you. Well, you can't be lost in Daphne because Daphne is like the culmination. It's the answer to all of the things that ail you. Come out of the world and settle in the groves of Daphne, right? And this is where all of these tributes to all of these Greek gods, right? Where Diana, which is Artemis, Arachne, Minerva, Zephyrus, Austere, all of these things, again, that if you understood the mythology as like inviting into this way of life and this way of thinking where you don't need to have all of the worries of the world, let them pass. Eat and drink, be merry, listen to good music, have fellowship and laughing. Don't have any kind of hardship. Don't make room for the struggle. Right? Again, this is very much a Roman way of thinking, right? In order to overcome the difficulties we have, we pursue pleasures or philosophy or something that will help us to transcend all of the difficulties or hardships of life. There's not even a thought given to the necessity of going through hardship or difficulty. And then towards the end of the chapter, it says this: in ordinary mood, Ben-Hur would not have come to the grove alone, or coming alone, he would have availed himself of his position in the consul's family and made provision against wandering idly about, unknowing and unknown. He would have had all the points of interest in mind and gone to them under guidance as the dispatch of business, or wishing to squander days of leisure in a beautiful place, he would have had in hand a letter to the master of it all, whoever he might be. This would have made him a sightseer, like the shouting herd he was accompanying, whereas he had no reverence for the deities of the grove, nor curiosity. A man in the blindness of bitter disappointment, he was adrift, not waiting for fate, but seeking it as a desperate challenger. And so he is fully now immersed in this place that represents temptation, adrift, aimless. So where does that, again, it begs this question, where does that lead to? The Bible tells us that we are to redeem the time. Why? Because the days are evil. It's so easy. I can say this after years of experience. It's so easy to fall into idleness. Right? In fact, we've been given our own personal Grove of Daphne in one sense. How many of you, does this look familiar to you? Anyone? Where we get caught up, right, in things that really, after we get some perspective, we go, oh, man, that was not worth the time. And then we move on to the mulberries of Daphne, next chapter, chapter 6. It says this: better be a worm and feed on the mulberries of Daphne than the king's guest. What's that mean?
I was going to ask what it meant.
All right, good. Let's figure it out here together. What does it mean? What do we think? Well, let me just ask this question. How many of you have read Hamlet? Okay.
Long time.
So maybe this sounds similar to, and there's some shades here with Hamlet. It says this in Hamlet: your worm is your only emperor for diet. That's pretty obscure, right? What does this mean? He's playing off of this idea of Hamlet. What's the main kind of point of Hamlet?
I don't know how to tell you.
So Hamlet is considered one of the tragedies. And so when we see in the tragedies, kind of the main thing that we need to know is to overcome a tragedy, right? The character's got to overcome this great difficulty that he has, and he's visited by the ghosts of his father, right? It's very like Dickens borrows really heavily from Macbeth in his Christmas Carol. And so we see kind of this coming up against this former generations and having to overcome these difficulties. And so what it's saying here is it's actually better in life as a general rule. It's just better to just be here and enjoy life and pleasures and feed. Like if you were a worm feeding off this grapefruit. How many of you like fruit? Like just nibbling on fruit. It would just be better for you if you just nibbled on some fruit than to be the king's guest. Well, why? That seems really weird. Don't you think being a guest of a king would be something pretty good? But what it's playing at here, there's so much metaphor and symbolism here. You guys, it would be harder in one sense because meeting the king or coming into contact with the king comes with a whole measure of a bunch of expectations. And you probably have to be really confident in who you are and the things you're doing and being really settled. But a worm, how much does a worm really care about its life, do you think? Let's dissect the thoughts of a worm. What do you think, Naomi? If you're a worm, are you thinking about the great existential crises of life? Or are you thinking, man, yeah, this fruit is good. That's just good. Like that's all you know, right? Like you can't even, I don't know, I'm not really analyzed worm brains, but I've got to imagine, right? Again, that's kind of the point. But let's take this back then to the first book where we find these three kings, right? These three kings of Orient are. These three wise men, these three magi, they're coming to what? What are they coming to do?
See the king.
See the king. And so there's a little bit of like, this is kind of some subtle humor going on here, which is what's actually better. It's to be the guest of the king. See, we want to think in terms of Christ here, Christ the king, this newfound king. It's actually better to be the king's guest than it is to nibble on, like a worm, on the mulberries of Daphne. And so Lou Wallace is a little tongue-in-cheek for us here. See, the way of the Roman thinking is right. To feed on something represents what? The appetites. To have the appetite for something. To consume something. To find joy, pleasures. That's the purpose of life. But what is the antithesis here of that? To be a guest with the king. So which way of life do we choose? Which is better? To be a worm eating mulberries, or to be invited into the presence of the king? But what is it saying here? Better be a worm and feed on the mulberries. See that again, this is a real telling thing about the mindset that is trying to entrap Judah into. Again, the place where we find disappointment, those seasons where we find disappointment, we are set up, if we're not careful, for temptation to pull us away. In fact, the Bible talks about how sin even enters into our lives, right? It's that we're set into this trap where we are drawn away. I think it's James, right? Drawn away by our evil desires. Well, this is exactly what Daphne represents, right? The evil desires they're easily found in places of pleasure, particularly when we're experiencing such depression of mind or heart. In fact, then it would later say of the Grove of Daphne here that the law of this happy place is love. That just sounds good, right? Like it's just all love here in Daphne. And this is the mindset of the world, right? Love is the big claim in the modern world. Love is love. What does that mean? It actually is a really demonic thing. Because what it really does is undermine that God is actually love and that God has a standard. And so love is not whatever you think love is, it's okay for whatever you think. No, that's perverted. Love is not defined by what our preferences are. Love is defined by God's standard. But this is kind of, again, the mindset that trickles in. And again, I want to just note that it's not any different back in Roman times than it is today. That there is still, very much so, particularly in the Western world, and it's why I love that Noah's going over some of the more ancient or other ways of thinking, because the Western world is really primarily driven by Greek and Roman thought. And then he says later on that the grove is a wall-less temple. You guys remember that? Temple without walls. So what do you go to a temple to do? To worship. But what is he worshiping here? See, the danger is that he could worship himself and only be going for his own pleasures. He could be worshiping at the altars of foreign gods, other gods. And that's really the intention here, right? Is that he is being drawn away. The place of great temptation is met with a state of great disappointment. Moving into now the last chapter that we'll go over. He notices, right, there are these horses that are coming about in Ilderim, right? And they're a little bit unruly, the horses are. But then he takes kind of a closer look and he observes some things about them, right? And this is kind of setting us up again, foreshadowing for things that are to come. And there is kind of this nature to really that there's kind of this observation of what these horses need, these 4 horses, what they need. It is somebody who is skilled enough and in control enough and able to guide them and lead them. And then we're left at the end of the chapter. Let's look about the last paragraph here. Sorry, I'm moving pretty fast through it here. The coming of the beautiful horses and resplendent chariot drew Ben-Hur to look at the driver with increased interest. Who is he? When Ben-Hur asked himself the question, he could not see the man's face or even his full figure. Now, the garden represents what? Temptation. See, a lot of times we think of temptation in a very certain way, but here is going to be Ben-Hur's temptation. This man that he sees before him. And what is the temptation going to be? Vengeance. Who could it be? Nearer now, the horses approaching at a trot. From the shouting and the gorgeousness of the turnout, it was thought he might be some official favorite or famous prince. Such an appearance was not inconsistent with exalted rank. Kings often struggled for the crown of leaves. What kind of leaves? Laurel. Laurel tree ties back in, again, all of this ties back into Daphne, right? To have the crown of laurel is actually emblematic of the crown of life that victors would have, right? Long before the Olympics had gold and silver and bronze medal, the victor would be crowned with the laurel headwear. And so what is this saying to us? Is that there's a type of victory to be achieved here, right? That really your desires will be something that are within your grasp. And it's not just that you get your desires, but you are crowned with those things. Nero and Commodus, it will be remembered, devoted themselves to the chariot. Ben-Hur arose and forced a passage down nearby to the railing in front of the lower seat of the stand. His face was earnest, his manner eager, and directly the whole person of the driver was in view. A companion rode with him in classic description of Myrtilus. Permitted men of high estate indulging their passion for the race course. And so, again, we see this tie-in of this temptation or this desire, this appetite for what? For victory. And this kind of victory, which was really predominant, was through chariot racing. Like this is like in the Grove of Daphne, in this place, this is like the highest way to, apart from victories in war, the Romans made great sport of different events, right? And this would have been the primary way in that place to be victorious in a chariot race. Showed that you were wise and cunning and able. Ben-Hur could see only the driver standing erect in the chariot with the reins passed several times around his body. So he didn't just hold the reins because it was actually really dangerous. They would be wrapped around you and then held on to. And this is a very vulnerable position because if you wipe out, what is likely going to happen? Some serious bodily harm here, right? You are anchored to the chariot itself and under the mercy and the power of the animals that are pulling you. And so if you're going to be a really effective navigator, captain of the chariot and the horses, right? You want to be somebody who's really competent and confident, right? You can't just throw anyone up there. And this, again, is played behind what Judah observed initially, kind of these horses that are out of control, versus now this rider is riding in and he has command, right? He's standing erect, head up, shoulders back, right? Proud. Obviously, this is somebody who's victorious. A handsome figure, scantily covered by a tunic of light red cloth. In the right hand, a whip. In the other, the arm raised and lightly extended, the 4 lines. The pose was exceedingly graceful and animated. Now, just look at the words that the author is using for us, right? He wants us to have what kind of picture in mind? That this is like a really exemplary person. Now, we know how this is going to end, but think of the sublimity of the words that he's using. And then when it's revealed to us who it is, where does your mind go? Wow, this person is... That's really, again, intentional. What is building for Judah, right? At the point of utter disappointment. I can't get any lower. Look at this wonderful, majestic person that is coming with these beautiful animals, full control of the chariot. There's just something about him. We are meant to feel a bit of hope, rising action, right? Like, okay, the stories, things are going, they've got to go, right? They've got to go better for Judah here. The pose was exceedingly graceful and animated. The cheers and clapping of hands were received with a statuesque indifference. Ben-Hur stood transfixed. His instinct and memory had served him faithfully. The driver was Masala. Now, again, what does this do within the heart and mind of Judah? By the selection of horses, the magnificence of the chariot, the attitude, the display of person, above all, by the expression of the cold, sharp, eagle features, and that was specific to Roman, right? The eagle represented, again, victory or strength or power. It was one of the symbols that the eagle that Romans would use. Imperialized in his countrymen by sway of the world through so many generations, Ben-Hur knew Masala unchanged, as haughty, confident, and audacious as ever, in the same ambition, cynicism, and mocking insouciance, which is indifference.
Now you made me interject,
Yes.
because you said he knew he was Masala. You have to say, Masala!
Yeah,
He just is my nemesis.
Yeah. Yes. With such vim and vigor. Right. Yeah.
The audiobook did it.
Yeah, I just remember that one line. He was like, Masala!
So there is. Yeah. I think that's a good point. There's an intensity that's there, right?
He could feel it.
Mhm.
He knew it was him, but then when he saw him, it was like,
It became visceral.
yeah.
Everything in him, right? Every bit of his person, and I love even the way it is. And then he knew. Well, this is a little bit of overstatement and hyperbole, right? How could Ben-Hur actually know whether Masala has changed or not just by looking at it? Well, of course he doesn't, but the author is super intentional about this point, right? The vengeance has taken over. Did I do something funny again? All right.
I'm sorry.
No, you're all right. As long as you're having a good time, we're good. Unchanged, haughty, confident, audacious as ever. Okay, now I want to ask you guys this question. It's a really important question. We'll pull away from the story, and then we're going to jump into Isaac here. But I also want to offer you some tools to effective reading, particularly with stuff like this. When you guys came to this chapter, think back for a second and see if you can remember this. How many of you continued to read on? Versus how many of you stopped and thought about what just happened? And meditated upon it and allowed the text to sink into you a little bit. Because this is one of those chapter stops, and that's why we're stopping here today, and it's intentional, where we want to be very cautious not to proceed in the story. Sometimes there is reading for the sake of reading, and we get into the story, but sometimes the author is shouting, Masala! Shouting really loud that we need to stop and consider what just took place. Again, let's think of the rising action, right? Judah is very hopeful, last week we talked about, and then he was disappointed. And we started our conversation today with him in the lowest place and set up for temptation. And he doesn't seem to fall in line of all of the worldly temptations like we might anticipate him falling into. Like we might anticipate he's going to fall in love with someone, or he's going to get drunk on wine, or something like that is going to take place. But his temptation is a little bit different. But we see him come to some understanding of himself to say, oh man, I normally wouldn't act this way. So he's seemingly pulling himself out of this dangerous place, right? And it feels like temptation is going to pass him by and he's going to pass the test. And then he sees Masala. And it yanks him right back down. Now, when we consider this, for a man whose idea, he's been Romanized. For a man whose idea of the answer to life right now is, if I can't have my mother and sister, I can have vengeance. Has this action that's just taken place, has that solidified his resolve towards vengeance, or has it resolved his desire for vengeance? Is there a greater desire for vengeance or less of a desire? What do you think? If it were you, what would it do? What would it create? And so this is why when we're reading good literature, we want to pause to consider what the author is setting up for us. Sometimes we get a little bit too curious about, we want to do what? We want this thing to be resolved. But of course the author doesn't want it resolved right now. That's why there's like whole other chunks of books, right? What the author is creating is the same thing that Judah is feeling, this tension. And as things get tighter and tighter and more tense, what are you willing to crave all the more? Resolution. How do you guys want the story to end? I want you to think about that this week. For those of you who haven't read all the book, right, and you don't know, how do I want this story to end? In fact, if you could write that out in 1 or 2 sentences, I would encourage you to do so. How do I want this story to end? And then when we get to the end of it, let's hold up how the author ended the story, and then let's come back to this place in time, about halfway through the book, and compare what actually happened versus how we wanted it to happen. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, either it was right or not right. And if it was right, then how do we pick up on the clues? And if it wasn't, how did we miss the clues? And we'll close there for now. Go ahead, Isaac.
Okay. I decided to go with the thief on the cross. And that is Luke 23, 39 through 43. One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said, since you are under the same sentence? We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Jesus answered him, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. The reason I chose that was at that time I realized that there was a recognition in him, in that guy on the cross, the thief. That it was this recognition that it wasn't about him at all. And it wasn't about the way he felt, but that it was about God. And that it was about how, in that moment, there's a faith there that kind of resonated with me. Of like, wow, there is no one else. There is nothing in me that is deserving of this. And it is only him through who I am worthy. And that's something that I've heard all the time growing up in church. But I think in that season when I read this, I was able to see it a different way. Because there's also a fear there and a reverence towards the Lord that is displayed through his heart to say something so simple. It was just I don't know, it had so much behind so little words. And I kind of saw that heart in the way David approached God as well after he fell short. Is that there was nothing that was surrounding him. There was no, like, I don't know, a lot of people look at repentance and they say, I need to feel sorry about something. Or I need to seek forgiveness in a certain way. But a lot of it is oriented around themselves. And I did not see that here. So that's why it stuck out to me.
Yeah, he was saying, right, this is a man who's at the end of his life. He's at the lowest point. And he was saying to Jesus, remember. I mean, Jesus just remember. Like, that is his hope, is just to be remembered by Jesus. Like, he's resigned himself. This action. And then what does Jesus say? Truly I say to you, today you will be with me. Complete and utterly blew apart his own way of thinking. Like, it's not about all of these other things. There's a humility and faith that's demonstrated there. All right, we will end it there for the day. Emma, you're up for us next week. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And that's that.